Hoorah! It's Chuck Dixon back to talk to you again about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Yes, it's Ask Chuck Dixon number 48. Let's get right to it. Kipabip says or asks, how would you recommend someone get a start in the industry? What are some common mistakes beginners, especially but not exclusively writers, make? Well, writers have it tough because they got to get people to read their material or listen to a pitch. Artists, on the other hand, can just show some dynamite, fabulous artwork if that's what they can do. And they either impress or don't impress the editor. It's all simply right there. But writers, you got to talk. You got to pitch, you got to push. I've always been terrible at pitching and pushing stuff, touting my own wonderfulness. Yeah, not good at that. But my biggest thing is, when I was trying to break in, and it's not possible anymore because this doesn't happen, but I would meet editors at conventions. And if there ever are conventions in the post-COVID world, editors still won't show up to them. Editors didn't, used to be at conventions all the time, looking for new talent and, living off of the company's expense account. That just doesn't happen anymore. But you used to be able to go see editors. And the mistake I always saw everybody make was they would hand the editors pitches, pitches or scripts or whatever. And I would see the editor's visceral reaction to this, and they would make these hollow promises to take a look at it. And I thought, well, that's never happening. This doesn't. So I would just try to talk to the editors, make some kind of rapport, talk about things they had edited, or in a lot of cases, things they had written. Most of the comic editors, when I was trying to break in, were writers as well. So at least I had something in common. They were writing professionally, and I wanted to write professionally. That way, if you develop some sort of rapport, you could call them, at DC or Marvel and say, hey, I'd love to stop by and talk. I'll be in New York next week, happen to be in the neighborhood. And could I stop by and talk to you? And that's when you would bring your pitch or your script or whatever, because that was more professional. And it didn't always work. I mean, some editors I just had no rapport with, and some editors I did. Luckily, Archie Goodwin, I got along great with Archie, and I always enjoyed talking to him at cons, and I think he enjoyed talking to me. I never seemed unwelcome at his table, and he would always, grant me an interview, although, quite frankly, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't professional enough, and he never hired me, but he always gave me some great advice and great suggestions, and was very kind with his time. Um, you know, so but there were others, Joe Orlando, Dick Giordano at DC, who I got to have interviews with, who were very generous with their time as well. Some of them even taking me out to lunch to let me down. But you know, being a writer, it's tough because you're by yourself most of the time, and you don't associate with the general public very often. And most writers, most good writers I know, don't have the gift of gab. We're kind of loners, and that's the way it should be. I don't have any use for writers who belong to writers associations. I mean, like the Horror Writers Association. Aren't horror novels supposed to be written by tortured Unabomber types? Why would they want to associate with anybody, let alone people just like them? I never understood that. But you know, that's that's just the hard part of being a writer, is to get in there and sell yourself. For me, now, I know a lot of writers who are they sell themselves quite well. The problem is they're just not very good writers, but they're real good at selling themselves. And the thing is to remain professional and remain focused on what it is the editor or publisher you're seeking to be hired by, what their focus is. Get on the same page with them. And by God, never say, I could write better than this guy. The guy you're currently employing sucks, and I could write better than him. Remember, they hired him, and he might be their cousin or their brother-in-law. So you never say that. Never say, I'm better than X, because it's just going to get you into a world of trouble. And, the best way is just to go in earnest, I'm a professional writer. My approach was always, I'm not here because I'm a Spider-Man fan. I'm here because I'm a professional writer. And when I broke into comics at that point, I was a professional writer. I'd written children's books. I got my name in credits on actual published work. Although I didn't want to write children's books, I wanted to write comic books. I proved to them, hey, I'm a writer first, a comic fan second. Kenny Todd. I'm reading some old Batman stories from the 90s. One of my favorite villains were Scarface and the Ventriloquist. Seems like there was an effort to either create new or use more obscure villains. Was there an editorial edict on that, or was it just, hey, let's not use the same ones over and over again? There was a lot of let's not use the same ones over and over again, but the big driving force in creating new villains for Batman is everybody wants to put their mark on Batman, and the best way to do that is create a villain that lasts. But it's very rare to create a villain that lasts. The other impetus was is that we were all told that we were, any new creations that we created for DC Comics, not Marvel, but DC, any new creations we had, we would have participation in. We would have partial ownership. We would have a tiny sliver of that pie. So that if that character went on to be in movies, TVs, kids' pajamas, be an action figure, be on lunchboxes, stuffed animals, we'd get a piece of that money. And so most of us, most of us who were industrious, not everybody did this, and I didn't know why, began to create reams of new characters to populate their books with. And this is the actuary. I wanted him to be a recurring character. I used him a few times. I really thought he'd stick. He was a former insurance adjuster who could figure out the odds of things, and he becomes a criminal, and he would figure out, the imponderables for criminals. What are the odds of this heist succeeding? And of course, he's always thwarted by the appearance of Batman. But yeah, the idea was to create as many characters as you could so you could share in this pool of money being created by DC Comics. And for the most part, it's lucrative. The more characters you created, the more times you spun the wheel, the more chances that you would get a piece of that, piece of that cash, get a little taste. So Graham Nolan and I, in particular, on Detective, created a lot of new characters. Gunhawk and Gun Bunny, I think, are our favorites. Another character called Gearhead, and then of course, you know, uh, other characters like the General and Joe Gardner, who I really was proud of, who was he was a Guy Gardner clone, and of course he had none of the personality of Guy Gardner. He was an alien clone, but he had all the power, and never really saw a whole lot of him uh, after his first few appearances. And Nightwing, spelled Nite dash Wing, who was Tad Ryerstad, who wanted to be Dick Grayson. He wanted to be Nightwing in every way imaginable. And Nightwing was another book, just like working with Graham Nolan. I'm working with Scott McDaniel, and I want to create a new rogues gallery for Nightwing. And the participation agreements are an impetus to do that, as well as to create villains to give Nightwing his very own rogues gallery. So, I created characters like Stallion and Brutal and Double Dare and Lady Vic, uh, and of course, Torque. And in addition, I added Shrike, who's kind of a retrofitted character into Dick Grayson's past when Dick Grayson was in training to be Robin. Um, Now, a character that Graham and I tried to bring back, uh, Captain Fear. We sort of rebooted Captain Fear, who was a 1970s adventure character. We rebooted him as a Batman villain, but the editors hated him, so he never appeared again. So we never really got to build anything off of all that. And that takes me to the subject of, you know, how you do your own take on the already existing classic villains. And this is something that a lot of people that run the 1966 TV show down don't seem to understand is that 66 TV show sort of cements or coalesces the personalities of the classic DC villains that it dealt with. The Joker's pretty much the Joker. He's a Dick Tracy villain. He's got a clown theme. He's a funny guy. He's a practical joker. That was kind of set in stone. But Catwoman was not. Catwoman didn't have a whole lot of personality in the comics, and the TV show gave her that. A sort of sociopathic kleptomaniac character with romantic designs on Batman. Penguin as well. Penguin was one of the goofier theme villains. I mean, the Penguin. Who's scared of penguins? And his trick umbrellas. I mean, it must have been a 3 martini lunch when they thought of that one. But the TV show, made him a womanizer, an egotist, a bit of a boulevardier, and really gave him more of a personality and made him a lot more vicious than he was in the comics. And then, of course, the Riddler. The Riddler was a theme character, used riddles. The TV show made him way over the top, psychopathic character with the awesome gimmick of creating riddles that either led Batman to his next crime or away from them, depending on the answers that Batman and Robin got from the riddles. So the TV show really did a lot to cement these characters, give them more form, because the television show needed these characters to have more depth than they ever had in the comics. And in the case of the Riddler, he's pretty much a forgotten character. He only made 2 appearances in the late 40s, and before he was dredged up again and put on television. But there's lots of other Batman characters that were kind of useless one-offs that I had a lot of fun with. Polka Dot Man, who I played off as just a total wannabe, like Condiment King, the character that came from the animated series. Calendar Man, what a useless character, but I did an 80-page giant in which Calendar Man commits crimes based on different end of the world scenarios and the dates from those end of the world scenarios. Denny O'Neil kind of challenged me. He said, "I challenge you to come up with an interesting Calendar Man story." And at the end product was, he said I did. He said he had a lot of fun reading it. Killer Moth is like a criminal Batman, a super villain mastermind guy who wants to basically be the underworld's version of Batman. Sort of forgotten, but I brought him back as a constant foil in my Batgirl stories, along with Firefly. Now, Firefly, Garfield Lins, I read about him when I was a kid. When I was a kid, he was a Hollywood special effects guy, and he used light to confuse and confound Batman. And I wanted to bring him back, but I didn't want to have that character. The costume was absolutely ridiculous. So this is one of the few times I actually did drawings and to redesign the character. And these were drawings I did to suggest what the character might look like for Graham Nolan to draw him. And my only regret about this, and I used this character a lot of times teamed with Killer Moth. Moth to the flame, get it. I really like doing this. In fact, it's one of the few times I ran into trouble with the comics code, because I made it quite clear that, like most pyromaniacs, which is what my Firefly was, he has a sexual attraction to fire. And I would come up with different inventive ways to sort of, in an Air Force reference, over the kids' heads, get it across that this guy literally got off on fire. Anyway, my biggest regret with this character is that Graham and I just didn't create a whole new character with this look, because he's been on cartoon TV and action figures and everything else, but we don't get any money. We don't get a piece of that participation because we didn't create a new character. We just did a version of an already established character. So there you go. It's like all the different entities of Batgirl. Those creators, Cassandra Cain and the rest, they don't see any participation money because Batgirl is an already established character and they're just doing another version of it. Okay, R.B. Probst, can you expound on your and Scott McDaniel's Richard Dragon run? Did you all pitch it, or did DC come to y'all with the proposal? Was it your idea to de-age Richard? I'm assuming he's de-aged in series, as the only images I see of him till then were of a balding, bearded guy who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s. How far out had you plotted, and did you get to do everything you wanted? Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter. Well, a little background on what Richard Dragon was all about. Richard Dragon was created in the 70s by Denny O'Neil because Kung Fu movies were like the big rage at theaters. They couldn't bring over enough, Chinese martial arts films out of Hong Kong and redubbed them poorly into English and slapped them into theaters and, double features and triple bills, and became kind of a thing. And so Denny O'Neil created Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter, who was based on a series of novels written by Sergius O'Shaughnessy, who was also Denny O'Neil. And then he used the outlandishly Irish name of Sergius O'Shaughnessy to write paperback novels under. And he did Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter. And, to be quite honest, it's not a terribly impressive series. Because it was Comics Code, it couldn't get as violent as the movies. And, it's kind of fun, but it's mostly goofy. And I don't think Denny ever looked back on the series with any kind of pride, except the creation of Richard Dragon and Lady Shiva and the Bronze Tiger, who, became kind of indelible at DC and the core of the martial arts world at DC Comics. And certainly became even more indelible in the 90s when myself and Doug Mensch and Alan Grant, made these characters kind of the center of the fighting universe for the Batman, world. Now, how Richard Dragon came about was I had been away from DC working at CrossGen, and CrossGen was folding, and eventually CrossGen would end my exclusive agreement with them. I was still working there, I was still getting a paycheck, but they allowed me to take outside work. And I forget which editor it was, said they were planning on doing a Richard Dragon monthly series with Scott McDaniel on the art, and thought, well, let's put Scott and Chuck together again, see if we can capture that Nightwing uh, feeling again, capture lightning in a bottle once again. And the problem with the series was it was kind of doomed from the beginning. Uh, the problem with the series was is that if we were going to do this, we were going to give Richard Dragon his own title. What should have happened is he should have appeared in a few arcs in other Batman books to basically let readers know who he was and his significance. Because, as Denny O'Neil wrote in Legends of the Dark Knight, Richard Dragon was one of the people who trained Batman in martial arts. He was Batman's sensei, or one of the many people that Bruce Wayne went to learn how to fight. And he should have been reestablished, But as it was, we come on the scene with this new Richard Dragon book, and a lot of readers had simply never heard of the character, or if they had, didn't realize the significance. He had no cool factor. There was no anticipation for this title. So we just kind of went in cold. And, like all comics do, number one did okay, and then the sales began to erode. And eventually, 12 issues later, we were canceled. Now, what plans did I have for this book beyond issue 12? I don't think I had any, because it was made clear to us by issue 8 that we were being canceled. So I really didn't have anything planned beyond. I mean, if you read the series, and I haven't reread this series in a long time, there's probably some dangling storyline threads and stuff that would indicate somewhat of where I was going, at least in the subplots, but I don't know. And the thing is, one of the reasons it was canceled, other books that sold less than us were kept on another year, because we were launched at a time with a bunch of new titles, and some of them were kept for 24 issue runs. But the difference being that they were friends with the editor in chief. The writers on those books were, you know, school chums. And there you go. It's not what you know, it's who you know. System error. I would love to see you go over your top French films since you're also a Melville fan like me. Um, yeah, I like French movies. I like French movies a whole lot. And the chief reason for this is Jean-Paul Belmondo. They brought over some Belmondo films in the 70s, and I just thought the guy was terrific. Uh, Belmondo, he had like a Steve McQueen cool, but he could also handle heavily dramatic roles with aplomb, and he could also maintain that cool while playing the clown. I mean, he could be a complete goofball and still be an effective leading man. It didn't take away any of his credibility or his elan to play the clown. And that man in Rio was one that I just simply fell in love with. It's a wild, wild Philip de Broca chase film that goes from Paris to the jungles of the Amazon over a very long and hectic weekend as Belmondo chases after the men who abducted his girlfriend. Thief of Paris is a heavy um, period drama about obviously a thief in Paris. It's a Louis Malle film. It involves crime and romance and all the rest of it. And in the 70s, Belmondo moved into action films, playing either criminals or cops. And this one is awesome. It's The Burglars, set in Athens. I think Athens, somewhere in Greece, maybe the island of Corfu. I'm not sure, but it's Belmondo as a burglar. In French, it's called La Casa, and Omar Sharif is the crooked cop tasked with catching him and taking away part of his loot. And it features some amazing Rene Julien car chases, which almost every latter Belmondo film included lots of car chases, often with Belmondo driving. That's the other thing about him. Belmondo was his own stuntman, and he made sure you knew it was him doing the stunts. He never used doubles. In fact, he consciously stopped doing stunts when he got into his early 50s, and he famously told the French press, "I don't want to be remembered as France's flying grandpa." Oh, so Belmondo got me into the French film scene, but thanks to the internet and a multi-region DVD player, I've been able to explore a lot more French films in the recent decades, including Jean-Pierre Melville's movies, things like oh man, I'm going to mess this up. Les Deux Cygnes Souffles, great crime film with Lino Ventura as a criminal on the run. And also, more popular or populist fare like Le Grand Vadrouille, which was this is the most, from what I've read, the most popular film ever made in France. And it's set during World War II, obviously. Terry Thomas and the crew members of an RAF bomber parachute out over Paris, and they are protected and hidden by classic French comedians Bourvil and Louis de Funès. And it's apparently the most popular film ever made in France, and for good reason. Huge production values, very funny, lots of action, and it's worth checking out. But of course, the French are known for the crime films. First and foremost, Rafifi, with its famous 20-minute silent sequence, one of the greatest heist films ever made. And another classic from around the same period is Traverse de Paris or Traverse de France, and it's Bourvil again with the classic actor Jean Gabin as two men tasked with smuggling the carcass of a pig across Nazi-occupied Paris. They're black marketeers, and it's an amazing film in that it goes from being sort of light comedy to heavy drama to a really touching, deeply emotionally cathartic movie at its end. It goes from kind of caper film to really heavy suspense film toward the. I've never seen a movie quite like it, and I only saw this one recently. But excellent film, excellent film. Elevator to the Gallows is I believe it's a Louis Malle film, and it's sort of a nod to the kind of Hitchcock film, the kind of film that Alfred Hitchcock made, and one of the most suspenseful um, ticking clock films I've ever seen. Eye of the Beholder is a terrific movie. Isabelle Huppert, um, based on one of my favorite novels by Mark Bem, also called Eye of the Beholder. I frankly can't remember the French title for this film, but it's about a private eye who's hired to prove that this woman who keeps marrying men who mysteriously die, to gather the evidence to prove that she is a black widow. And it's kind of like a pastiche of the private eye genre while being a great private eye movie in itself. And it's one of the few times when a writer got the last word on a genre. And this, both the novel and the movie do that. It's like this is the last word on the entire private detective genre, and it's definitely worth seeing. I think there's an American version, but I've never seen it, and from what I've read, have no interest. But there you go, a little quick survey of my interest in French films. Um, and that's it for me. I want to thank you all for listening, and also to tell you that through Patreon you can support Archaven Comics, which in just a few weeks is going to launch an amazing new universe of characters, an incredible amount of material that we've been working on for almost a year in a brand new digital platform, which I'll tell you more about in the coming weeks. But you can support this material. I ask you to please go over to Patreon, look at the Archaven Comics page. You can see some of the stuff we're working on, but trust me, it's the tip of the iceberg. And we're working with some of the top talents in the business to create a brand new digital comics platform that has some amazing features that aren't available on any other digital comics platform. It's going to be a whole new experience, high resolution art, um, a wide variety of genres and interests. And I hope you go over there and check it out. And it's also the Chuck Dixon Slush Fund. If you become a member of Archaven Comics and subscribe, it helps generate the funds needed to pay our artists to do the work. So, um, we've done well so far, but as this platform grows, we hope to do more and present even more and more work. But we have a lot of unique, brand new comic book series starting in just a few weeks, and the service will be free new comics available to you on any of your devices. So there you go. That's it. See you down the road.